Hey friends, guess what? Retired military aviator, speaker, and teacher of Bible prophecy, Pete Garcia, is back with us to do another episode. We'll hear from him next.
Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazo.
God bless you and Merry Christmas season, friends. The website is rev310.net. That's rev310.net. Pete Garcia is our guest today. After more than 50 years in power, the Assad regime controlling Syria fell a couple weekends ago, and Israel has been busy. Pete, welcome back. Thanks for doing another show with us.
Hey, it's good to be back again with you.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, first of all, your response to what's been happening in the Middle East. We're going over there to talk about geopolitics this episode, and we can also talk about how the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump might impact what we're going to see happening policy-wise over there. So start wherever you want. We'll just take it from there.
Well, Netanyahu, I'm sure was very glad on November 6th to see who came out on top in the presidential election. He's been friends with Trump for a very long time, so their friendship has gone well beyond the confines of political office. But with that said, I can see, Trump has already laid out some of his wish list that Netanyahu do what they have to do to get the job done, to get their hostages back and to neutralize the threat, but yet at the same time, not let this drag on for, throughout the rest of his administration. I think he would rather see this get done quickly rather than this be something that hangs over his head like an albatross around his neck, for the next 4 years. So I think that's given Netanyahu the requisite momentum to get things going. And then when you throw in a thing like the collapse of the Syrian government, the Bashar Assad government, I think Netanyahu has taken the prudent measures to go ahead and take the Syrian side of the Golan Heights and create a buffer zone in there so that whoever comes out on top with all these different rebel groups that are fighting, that they don't that the Israelis make it a lot harder for them to ever, get back on their border. And the one group, the HTS, I can't say the name of it, but they're basically the Al-Nusra Front that's revamped and very much ISIS-like, have already made their future intentions known that they are not only going to just take over Syria, but they're also going to take over the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So their intentions don't seem friendly. Therefore, Netanyahu and the rest of the nation of Israel are justified, in my opinion, for creating a buffer zones to make it that much harder for whichever group takes over. Not only that, but they're also taking out Bashar Assad's massive weapons, chemical, biological, and otherwise weapons depots and facilities, as well as probably knocking out a lot of their missile silos and bunkers and depots where they have things staged in the event of a war with Israel. So Israel's taking those things out, taking out the tunnels, trying to prepare themselves as best they can for whichever government comes out on top there in Syria.
It's really unprecedented, really, what we're seeing. There's an article over at Prophecy News Watch, prophecynewswatch.com. Israel just sank the entire Syrian Navy, crippled the Air Force. Israel attacked 1,400 targets in Syria, destroying chemical weapons facilities, missiles, aircrafts, even submarines, anti-aircraft systems. So, Pete, they've been busy. This is not just some overnight thing or some reactive campaign. This is something that had to be planned. And as you said, I don't know, most fair-minded people hopefully are thinking, I think maybe they're justified, but there's some on the left that obviously they're going to blame Israel for everything. So just your thought on just how of a massive undertaking this had to be.
I think they've known for a long time. They seem their intelligence is really second to none when it comes to knowing what the neighboring threats, what their capabilities are, where their uh, uh, weapon depots are, where their attack sites are going to be at, and things like that. So I think the one thing that surprised Israel the most, aside from the actual attack on October the 7th, was the extensive tunnel networks that they found
Mm,
underneath Gaza. They knew Hezbollah had Hezbollah was in power there for a long time, so they've had at least 2 decades to do all this tunneling. They didn't. I think they underestimated Hamas and their abilities to tunnel to the extent that they did, and the same thing could go with Syria. I think they probably have better intelligence on Syria, given the fact that Bashar Assad's been in power there for since his father took over in I think 1970, and then Bashar the son took over I think in the year 2000. So Israel's had a long, extensive running list of things that they've been keeping track of within Syria. Uh, so yeah, I think they're trying to prepare themselves the best they can. They've also got to keep in mind that the Lebanese government is on the fritz, with Hezbollah being such the power broker that they were. Now they're not. That creates a power vacuum, which is what allowed for this Al Nusra Front group to come in and take advantage of the chaos, with Russia being tied up in Ukraine, with Iran being tied up fighting Israel, and also having lost basically every engagement they fought with them on, with the death of Abraham Raisi back in May. There's been a lot of turmoil for Iran themselves, so things are not going very well for them. And the Sunni radicals there in Syria just took advantage of the situation. And so now Netanyahu's doing the prudent thing, and making sure that if they ever decide to attack Israel, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do it the further back, on the other side of this buffer zone, with a fraction of the weapons that they would have had.
So, Pete, I want to go to another angle here briefly, and that would be persecution, Christians in the area, minority groups in the area. There's a Harbinger's Daily article we'll get to in a minute, but over at FaithWire, they talked with Joel Veldkamp. He's an international communications officer for Christian Solidarity International. It's a persecution watchdog, and he's sounding the alarm about what could happen as a result of toppling Assad's regime in Syria and the rise of terror groups there. And he said it won't be good for Israel, and it won't be good for Christians, and for anyone except Turkey, really. So this is the head of a watchdog group, persecution watchdog group. And over at Harbinger's Daily, it says the headline is, "In the wake of the armed takeover of Syria, religious freedom groups urge prayer for Christian populations." So let's shift briefly to this perspective of minority groups and Christians in the area that will be affected by this. Pete, your thoughts?
Well, like Lebanon, I mean, there's a huge there's a very diverse group of peoples there in communities. You got everybody from the Sunni Muslims to the Shia Muslims to the Druze to the Christians, and then the Christian side, you may have Eastern Orthodox, you may have Coptic Christians. There may
Mm-hmm.
be just different flavors of Christians there, different sects within the Shia groups and the Sunni groups, and then you have the Kurds, who are a flavor of Sunni but different. I couldn't tell you what the difference is, but they've been at odds with both Iran and Turkey for decades now, and have many grievances against both of those entities, and Saddam Hussein, in Iraq, but with him gone now. So the Kurds are definitely an issue. That probably the biggest factor here in terms of who's going to be persecuted the most, in my opinion. There's not a whole lot of Christians there. There are Christian minorities groups in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, but not as numerous as we might think.
Right.
With that said, I would expect that just like ISIS did back in 2014, 2015 timeframe, they're going to come in, they're going to try and stand up some type of Islamic theocracy. And if you're not Muslim, At first, they may just say, "Okay, well, you just pay taxes," but we soon find out that the gloves come off, the
Yep.
mask comes off, and they'll
Yep.
end up persecuting and killing anybody that doesn't agree with them 100%. So, if I were not that particular flavor of Sunni Islam that the terrorist groups are, I would be worried. Even if I were Shia, if I were Kurd, if I were
Hmm.
Druze, if I were Christian, anybody that's not their brand of crazy is going to
Yeah.
get it's going
Yeah.
to find an early exit.
Yeah, according to Open Doors, they went from the Christian population in Syria from 1.5 million about a decade ago to fewer than 300,000 because of these ongoing wars between Islamic factions. And looks like there's a lot of Christians. Thousands have fled to refugee camps, and others are trapped in their homes. And so, friends, this is a good time to remember our brothers and sisters in Christ there who are going to be suffering and persecuted. As Pete was saying, Islam is no respecter of persons when it comes to those not submitting to Allah. So, one thing I wanted to ask you, Pete. So, we don't hear enough about the relationship between Assad and Russia. So, the Russian state media reported that Assad flew to Moscow. He escaped to Moscow with his family. He was granted asylum by Putin. And this is really interesting. I didn't realize how strong of allies apparently Assad and Russia were. Could you speak to that for a little bit or share whatever thoughts or angles on that?
Yeah, I mean, strategically speaking, Syria has been a very strategic location for Russia. They don't have a whole lot of warm water ports, and that what that means is like a lot of the ports for their ships and submarines in Russia, territorial Russia, are frozen half the year, so it makes it difficult to use them. So having a place like Lacti or was it Tartus in Syria is a nice place for the Russians to be able to station their navy at, just like we have the navy at Bahrain. I think the Seventh Fleet is based out of there. They have their ships based out of Tartus there in Syria on the coast. Stays warm all year long. That gives them a lot of mobility. So that's been a very advantageous relationship between Bashar Assad and the Russian government for the last couple of decades. Now, Syria has been since the Arab Spring have had to been creative in how they make money. So aside from because of all the sanctions that are on them and being blacklisted from basically doing any kind of normal business anywhere in the world, Bashar Assad has turned to the illicit side of money making through the production of drugs at Captagon, with the transmission of weapon systems, missiles, things like that, and they allow um, fighters from Iraq and from Iran to transit Syria. They obviously have to pay the tolls, pay that kind of stuff. There's cuts and kickbacks to all varying flavors of people that allow these missiles and weapons that are ultimately destined for Israel to be pointed at Israel to transit through Syria. So there's been some good strategic advantageous relational benefits that both sides have taken and used for their advantage over the last 20 years. Bashar Assad has allowed, had the Russians backing him militarily, which is why didn't happen, 10 years ago. But now with Russia so bogged down with Ukraine and with everything else going on,
Hmm,
they just
that's right.
and with the collapse of Hezbollah, the collapse of Hamas, that this has been the perfect opportunity for this HTS slash Nusra group to go ahead and take advantage of the chaos. So Russia's definitely lost that. I don't think they're going to want to have lost that for long. I think they're going to try and recapture this once they're done in Ukraine. So this seems to me a couple of things. One, it's going to be uh, it would be advantageous for Putin to go ahead and finish up things with Ukraine,
Huh.
and it seems advantageous. I use that word a lot with Trump coming in, but it seems advantageous for Trump wanting to push a peace treaty or some kind of a peace settlement between Ukraine and Russia, which would free up Russia if this does happen on day one of his administration. It would allow him to go ahead and redouble or double his efforts back down in Syria. Trump's already indicated, hey, we don't want anything to do with Syria. We don't want to be there. It's not our fight. We don't care about Syria. It's Israel's problem, and we will support Israel, but we're not putting U.S. boots on the ground in Syria anymore. I know that there's boots on the ground now, and I have a friend of mine's over there right now. So uh, it seems like that's the U.S. is going to pull out of there. That will draw Russia back in there once things are buttoned up with Ukraine. And I think that this may be what sets the stage, not for Isaiah 17 necessarily, but for a Gog-Magog conflict in the future. Because I guarantee you this, I can promise you this, whatever government comes out of this is going to be far worse than what Bashar Assad had been running. As bad as he was, this is going to be worse.
Wow.
And the international community is not going to tolerate it for long. But I think that gives Russia the impetus to go ahead and move fully back in. And they may divide it up with Turkey, the borders there. But I think that this is a huge game changer for that Ezekiel 38 buildup.
That's a pretty big statement. Very interesting. By the way, friends, we're with Pete Garcia. We've got to take a brief pause. He mentioned Damascus. We're going to talk briefly about that. There's different perspectives biblically on Isaiah 17. So we'll talk about that on Worldview Matters next.
Introducing Patriot Mobile, the wireless carrier that stands with you. We are committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream.
Get free activation now with promo code DAVID. Hey friends, we're getting ready to wrap up our campaign here, our fundraiser for the next 6 months. We're raising production costs for Worldview Matters. We do this twice a year. So for those able to contribute a one-time gift of $200 or a recurring gift of $25 a month, we'd love to send you a brand new commemorative rose gold pen set with Worldview Matters on it. And first-time donors, we want to thank you by sending you our mug, Worldview Matters, and my tagline on the other side, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. The website for your tax-deductible gift is worldviewmatters.tv. Thanks for your prayers and financial support. So let's talk about Isaiah 17 briefly. It says a day is coming when Syria's capital will be destroyed in its entirety. It says the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. And I remember Amir Sarfati, I think, years ago used to say, the world is watching Israel, and Israel is watching Damascus. I just paraphrased that. But Eric Stakelbeck's got a great show and podcast, and he underscored that the latest civil war in Syria makes the prophecy all the more relevant. He said this, and I'll get your response, Pete. He said, all of a sudden, there's a bullseye on Damascus. The prophecy laid out in Isaiah 17 that Damascus will become a ruinous heap. Damascus has never been completely destroyed, even during the civil war that broke out in 2011. But the Bible is very clear that a day is coming when Damascus will cease to be a city. End quote. That was Eric Stakelbeck. And Pete Garcia, just so many interesting aspects to this. Just share your thoughts on Damascus and that prophetic word.
So when the U.S. when the U.S. fought Saddam Hussein back during the Gulf War, shortly thereafter, after he pulled out of Kuwait, we put a no-fly zone over the northern and southern tips of Iraq. And I think it was during the 90s, during this time frame, is that when Saddam Hussein began to transition a lot of his weapons of mass destruction, whatever flavor that was, into Damascus, or into the hands of Bashar Assad's father, who him and Saddam were both Ba'athist, from the Ba'athist political party. So it was during these 10 years, I think, that a lot of that stuff began to get stored underneath Damascus.
Hmm.
We've seen from what's been exposed with the conflict in Gaza and with Hezbollah in the north. In the age of satellites, you have to bury things. You have to put things underground because nothing is
That's
safe
right.
on the
That's right.
surface. So it seems to me that at some point here in the not too distant future, something happens that Damascus gets destroyed. It doesn't say who destroys it. It could be Israel. It could be the Americans. It could be something that Bashar Assad left behind, like a booby trap, as it were. He could have booby trapped the city. He's been there for decades. His father was there for 30, 40 years before him. So I think that, and we know there's extensive tunneling, subterranean infrastructure underneath Damascus. So it could be that he rigged it, or he has it so rigged that when if he was ever thrown out of power, he could always detonate that thing remotely. So we don't know what causes the destruction of Damascus, but there's enough bad stuff down there to make a dirty bomb. Certainly, the most logical result is that whatever blows up there is going to be a mix of so many different things. It could be that nobody can physically live there any longer.
Hmm.
So that is not outside the realm of possibility. What we don't know is who actually destroys it. I mean,
Right.
God could destroy it. The Israelis, we just don't know. It doesn't say who it is. It
Interesting.
just says that it's taken away. And generally speaking, when God does something, He's going to claim responsibility. So I don't think it's God. I do think there may be a chain of events that happen, like a dominoes that start
Yeah.
falling, that something triggers a reaction underneath the city, and it just things kind of get cascade from bad to worse.
So I want you to respond to what Benjamin Netanyahu said, and I'm quoting. He said, "We are going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we will do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel." He said, "We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel. This is a temporary defensive position until a suitable arrangement is found." Pete, your thoughts?
I think that suitable arrangement is going to be Russia coming back in once they're
Hmm.
done with Ukraine,
Hmm.
and I do think that this group may make a ill-fated attempt to march on Israel or something, and then that's going to end up bad for them. And then you have the whole thing with Damascus. So
Yeah,
I
interesting.
do think ultimately what happens is Turkey and Russia come in and try to stabilize what's left after like this ISIS like government takes over, or Taliban like government takes over. Um, and I do think that this will happen here in the not too distant future, probably within the next couple of years. It'd be my guess, but um, it's going to set the stage for Ezekiel 38 in a big way. So what the big unknown is right now is what happens with Iraq, because Iraq is right in the middle between Iran, and all of their goals is over there, with Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. So I would think that the Iraq government collapses too in the process between now and then. So something happens. It's going to give access and give the ability for militants to become radicalized in Iraq. It's going to have access for Iran to make it over to Israel and basically set the stage for Gog and Magog. And ultimately, I think Gog and Magog, the reason it's called that is because it's pulling people from all corners of the earth, right? So it's like the Crusades, except in reverse. Instead of the Christians marching on Jerusalem, now it's going to be Muslims from all over the world. I
Hmm.
don't mean men, women, children. I mean like military age males, radicalized. They're going to want to join this huge last ditch effort to get rid of Israel, and they're going to come from everywhere, from Africa, from Europe, from Asia, from the stands, from Eurasia, and they're all going to come. And it seems like they're massing in Syria. So Syria has got to be a friendly place for them to come together, and that means there may be some displacement with the Kurds. The Kurds may end up being pushed back into Kurdistan, which is in what used to be northern Iraq. Um, So that may make that if Turkey begins to move into Syria, those Kurds are going to be moving the other direction. So they're not going to stay there and let the Turks come in and abuse them. So that's what I see happening. And got to remember, last thing, just all these countries over there, they're all young. They're all young. Egypt,
Yes.
1922, Turkey, 1923, Saudi Arabia, 1932, Lebanon, 1943, Syria, 1944, Jordan, 1946, Iraq, 1947, Egypt, 1947, Israel,
Wow.
1948. Israel has been the most stable country in this whole last 100 years, and yet we're constantly, and all of those countries I just mentioned are Muslim, and yet we're trying to take the one little tiny sliver of Judaism in the world,
Yep.
and the only nation state that's Jewish, and try and divide that up. And I honestly think that Israel is going to somehow during the next 4 years, if we're still here throughout the whole time, is going to annex all of Judea and Samaria and make that all Israel. And they're going to have to move these Arab Egyptians or whoever claiming to be Palestinian, they're going to have to move them out to another country or to another location. And it may be that the U.S. incentivizes that move. It may be that there's no strategic way or logical way to secure Israel without securing the West Bank and Judea, or with what the world calls the West Bank, but what we call Judea and Samaria. There's no way to secure Israel without securing that first. So I think a lot of these things, this thing with Syria has kicked a lot of things into motion now. So
Yeah.
um, we're going to have to just watch it play out. But I expect things to continually pick up and become more and more prophetically accelerated.
Yeah, my goodness, we're already living in such prophetic times and more to come, right, Pete Garcia? Thanks so
Right.
much. I want to direct people. You wrote a blog early in December called The Art of Almost Living. Great perspective on that. We don't have time to get into it, but I'd encourage people to go to rev310.net. Look up that, because you say many of the takeaways recognize that we can only find true peace in Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's it. The Art of Almost Living. You make some great points in there, and you just wrap it up with some great thoughts on eternal perspective and how we will go through trials. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. In me you will have peace. In the world, wars, rumors of wars, and we don't want to, get people upset by talking about these things, but from a biblical perspective, this is why we like to bring them up and just, share what's going on and remind people to keep their faith in God. Pete, I love you, brother. Thanks for doing an extra podcast with us, and we'll be in touch. Merry Christmas.
Hey, Merry Christmas, and it's been great to be on with you again anytime.
Amen. Well, good. We got you on tape saying that. So good. Thanks, Pete. All right, friends. Again, Merry Christmas season. God bless you. Keep standing for the truth of Jesus Christ. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. See you next time.